welcome back. Welcome back. Jeez, that's a bad start to the episode, isn't it? So I mean, this has been not a long time coming, but we've changed days. We're here, we're there, we're not there, we're here, but eventually we're all in the same room, even if it's online, yeah. Somewhat in the same room. But yeah, thank you for being here. I know it's been, like I said, a while for us to get this together, and we've all had to organise things, but I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while.
Yeah, same.
I think everybody loves learning about like documentaries and animals and things, and I'm like, if I can get into the kind of zone, I can be in this for like days and weeks. So like, I start watching one documentary on, I don't know, I watched that Chimp Empire, then I'm just like, oh, I might watch it again. So I watched it again, and then I went home and I was like, oh, Dad, you like chimpanzees and all that. Why don't you watch this Netflix series? Yeah, I'll watch it. So I watched it a third time. And then you watch more and more and more. But yeah, so it's been a long time coming. I know we're only, episode 9, but here we are. So who are you, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and why are you here?
So my name is Dr. Samantha Ward. I'm an associate professor at Nottingham Trent University in zoo animal welfare. And why am I here? Oh, that's a good question, because you wonderful gentlemen decided to invite me to come and talk about, I suppose, what I do a little bit, and probably a little bit of how I got here to where I am now. So that's why I'm here.
So yeah, hopefully you'll survive through this episode. You won't be too bored out your mind by two of us asking questions that we don't really know a lot about, but want to know more. So
I could talk about zoos and animals like you, I suppose, for days. So I think the difficulty will to keep it short.
Right then, let's live up to it and start then. So like I've said, I mean, I watched that Chimp Empire multiple times. I've seen documentaries before and things. And I don't know whether maybe it is some like weird human nature thing, but that's where it kind of began for me, like just documentary watching and things like that. Where did you kind of first get into kind of looking and researching into animals? Was it like always, even when you was, small, was you always like into zoos and things and all like that? Where did it kind of start for you?
I think it must have been from when I was a child. So we used to live in a normal sort of bungalow house, but we had quite a big garden. And my dad was always interested in animals. And so we started off with rabbits and guinea pigs. And then all of a sudden we got chickens. And then we randomly went to a farmer's market one year, and Dad had decided that he wanted a Shetland pony. And we were like, oh yeah, it's a great idea. We'll get a Shetland pony. Because he was thinking, he wouldn't have to mow the grass. I ended up falling in love with this little goat who was going for slaughter. And I was like, oh, well, look at that little goat. He's so cute, because it was a male goat. And so in the end, we didn't get a Shetland pony. We got a little goat. And this goat was basically sounds a bit sad, but my little best friend. We used to take him for walks around the village. Used to, have a collar, clip him on a lead, and we'd walk him around the village. And everyone would be like, is that a goat? Like, no, of course not. It's an African hound dog, and just make up a different breed of dog that never existed whenever anyone asked. And then eventually he would, he'd run fun runs with us. So he was in the newspaper with his own little number. And so, I think, and it was mainly me who was kind of looking after him and cleaning him out and feeding him on morning and evening. So I think it must have been that and looking after animals from a young age that got me really interested in animals. I
mean, I'm sure I know people, when I go back home, people walk cats on a lead and they get looks of like, why are you walking a cat on a lead? Grow up, get a dog. So what does it even look like when you're walking a goat on a lead? How old was you at that point?
I think I was probably about maybe 12, 12, something like that. So there was me, my sister, who was a year and a half younger, and our neighbours. So there was 4 girls just tootling around this little village. And obviously it was in the days when villages were a little bit more safer and you could trust your children to go out and walk without having to worry about, terrible things that might happen. So yeah, it was just, he was ever such a well-behaved goat. I can't imagine doing it with a goat these days. I'd be like, no, it'd break its leash, it'd be running off and causing havoc on the roads. But no, he used to just love trotting along next to us, and would stop off and munch a bit of grass, and then come home. So it was good.
Did he have a name?
He was called Fudge.
Fudge.
Fair enough. I mean, got to ask the question: how was it? Could you get it to sit, stay, roll over?
No, the only thing. No, do you know what? There's nothing that we could do. I mean, now I look back and now I'm like, well, actually, my knowledge now, we could have totally trained that goat, and we could have done it, asked it to do all sorts of wonderful things. But no, we didn't back then. It was just clip it on a lead and go for a walk. He used to quite often break out of his pen, and he used to break into next door's garden, and they were really pristine gardeners, and all the flowers were perfect in different locations, and he'd break through and just take all the heads of the flowers off and be like, sorry.
Well, it wasn't me, it was the dog the other side.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Of course it wasn't a goat. No, don't be silly.
So what, you're going to do it again then when you're going to buy another goat and have a goat part 2, see if you can train it to sit there and roll over?
Well, I now currently live I have a small holding, and so we've got sheep, and it's basically an orchard, so we've got lots of trees, and so unfortunately it means that a goat is not really that feasible, because with a goat we definitely wouldn't have trees. So we can't go back into the world of goats, but I still keep my sheep in, so yeah.
Replace goats for sheep.
Exactly.
So I mean, if you go back to say, when was it you kind of got into your the research you wanted to do? Did you know exactly, obviously, with the whole goats and everything, when you went to secondary school, did you think, okay, when you finished, say, secondary school, with you that's what I want to do? Or when you got to uni, did you know roughly, or was it just take it as it comes?
Yeah, so I think, again, sort of back in my day at school, careers and animals were basically you would become a vet, and there was no other career really in animals. And I did like animal sciences and biology specifically. So I think, my mind was, I'm going to train and I'll be a vet. But I wasn't clever enough to be a vet, if I'm honest. I didn't get the A-level grades, and I worked as hard as I could possibly get, and it just wasn't really for me. And so I kind of struck this kind of, I suppose, this path point where you're like, I don't know what else I'm going to do, because that's the only job that the careers advisor have told me, that I can work with animals. And so I thought, well, I don't necessarily need to think now. I just need to, I'll just do a degree in zoology, and that's animal science based, and it will hopefully help to direct me as to where I might want to go. And so that's what I did. And I was at Liverpool John Moores University doing applied zoology. And it wasn't until my 3rd year where I requested to do a placement year, where a year in industry, a voluntary year. And essentially I went to work down at Paynton Zoo. And I was like, this sounds good. I'll go and work in a zoo for a year. And that's when I was like, yeah, this is me. This is what I want to do. These animals are amazing. And the different staff that I met working down at the zoo are still, colleagues today that work with quite closely. So yeah, that was, for me, it was after university or during university where I kind of realized where I wanted to be.
Well, Liverpool John Moore, I've heard how much work was going on there, because I've heard that's there are quite a few drinks and nights out in that uni. Was it part-time uni, was it?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it's funny as well. I mean, you look at the university hours these days, and it's maybe 2 or 3 days a week, and we were 5 days a week. Wow. 9 till 5. If we weren't in lectures, we were in labs or computer rooms, and lots of different practical sessions and things. But yeah, I think first year was definitely a learning curve of balancing going out and school and work, I suppose. And then second year I was like, oh god, all of that fundamental stuff in first year that I missed was really important. So I then had to try and kind of catch up on stuff from the first year and in the second year, and then kind of make it up. But yeah, so it was good fun. Liverpool is still to this day one of my favourite cities. It's a wonderful place to be.
Kind of sounds like us.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had some catching up to do. Well, no, I had some catching up to do second year, I'll tell you that. But yeah, I mean, I've only ever been to Liverpool once, but it's a nice area, isn't it, for what it is? Yeah, it's quite nice. So, what, you only did that 1 year then in the placement year, and then how long after that did you go into kind of doing that more as in inverted commas, a job? Did it straight away, or did you have a bit of time off?
So I did my a year in industry, and then I went back into my final year, and that's when I was like, right, I need to knuckle down. I need to get some good grades. I need to come out of here with a good degree. And then I applied for 1,000,001 jobs in zoos. And got a job at a zoo in Cumbria as a zookeeper. And so I worked there for 2 years. Again, I suppose it's really funny because I hadn't really started to put this together until thinking about, my career and what I've done and so on and so forth for this podcast. And I was like, I wonder why I always opted for, I worked with rhinos and giraffe, and I was like, I really love like herbivore species. Some people are like, oh, big cats are for me, or primates. And I'm like, why am I into herbivores? And I think it's because of Fudge the goat. And, all of that wonderful time that I spent with him, as a child. I think, working with herbivores in zoos was then my connection to maybe childhood or those
it all
fun
comes
times.
full circle.
Exactly, yeah. So I was working with some lovely white rhinos and some giraffe, and then there was quite a few other species that I worked with, but they were that was the main sort of section that I was linked with, which was really good fun.
Do you enjoy, I mean, I know I'm jumping ahead of it now, but do you enjoy that more, kind of being in their hands, getting dirty? I mean, probably very, very dirty, or kind of where you are now. Do you think could you go back to doing that, or do you prefer where you are now?
No, I absolutely loved it. I think that's probably why I have the small holding, and we have the animals at home, because being in the academic world, you don't have that, like you say, the hands-on kind of work where you can really get stuck in. So I now have that in my home life, and then I have the kind of the analytics and the evaluation side in the work life, but it's still animals.
How far was that how long of a transition was that from you kind of working just as, in the zoo kind of hands-on to then becoming more of like in the universities kind of area? Was that, what was the years between that?
Let me think. So I worked at the zoo in the zookeeping world for 2-3 years. I then decided that I needed to use my brain instead of my muscles for a little bit. So that's when I went and did a master's down at Exeter University in animal behaviour. And then after that, I did a PhD. And that was in animal behaviour and welfare. And then after the PhD was when I then went back into the zoo industry. So I was back into sort of academia, then industry. And then I came to Nottingham Trent in 2013. In fact, it's probably been 10 years a couple of days ago since I've been here, and then sort of worked up from lecturer to senior lecturer to now associate professor.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I bet you was quite ahead of not ahead of everybody else, but you knew what you were doing when you'd already worked kind of with the animals before, and rather than going straight into a master's. I'm guessing was that a little bit easier to do then?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of master's courses and PhD ships now really want that kind of life experience. They don't necessarily just want somebody that's just come through the academics, because not everybody can pass and do well at university, but it does take a different ability and a different skill set to be able to do academia and kind of get some industry knowledge and experience, and then kind of combine them together to be able to make it fit and make it work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess through your time studying as well, did you kind of, obviously I assume you've been working with some endangered species as well, or what's been sort of your experience on that? Because surely there might have been, some species that when you first started in the industry weren't, endangered, or, there were loads of them, but now, we're sitting here, they might be. What's your experience been of that, and have you seen it up, like, in person?
So not specifically with zoo animals. So I suppose the context of that is that all of the animals in zoos from the past, well, certainly since I've been in the industry, are captive born and bred. So they've not been taken from the wild to fill up sort of captive spaces. And the idea being that, we're breeding them to make sustainable populations, which then means eventually, if needed, we can try and reintroduce populations back into the wild. So there has been certainly a huge number of species that have changed from, not threatened to threatened. But I suppose working with them in captivity, you don't necessarily see that change quite so dramatically, because the captive population generally, if you're doing well, is growing, because you're treating the animals well, they've got really good welfare, you're managing them correctly in terms of their health, disease, welfare, and therefore they're reproducing. So in the captive sense of the world, the animals' numbers are increasing, even though in the wild the animals are decreasing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's interesting because sometimes, you see these posts on social media saying there are only this many,
Yeah, I know they say that a lot about the lion. Is it the lions or tigers? There's more captive in Texas or something than there is in all of India or something. I'm probably
insane.
butchering that, but something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, there's quite a few species, cotton top tamarins, which are the little cute primates with the punk rocker hairdos. There's more of those in the captive population than there are in the wild. And it's crazy when you think about that. It's, we really need to be doing, and that's what zoos are trying to do, is to, raise awareness and really push for people to kind of, I suppose, link and get those connections with the animals, so that people care more to be able to try and do something about them in the wild, which is, a really big message, I think, that they're trying to put out there.
So when you kind of started and were you doing your master's degree and all like that, what was your first kind of research project? Do you remember that? What animal did you focus on during that one? Was it a big scary lion, or what was it you dealt with?
So my very first research project in a zoo was looking at colobus monkey poo.
Oh wow!
Getting your hands dirty back to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we were looking at was looking at parasite load. So we were training the colobus monkeys so that they would station at different areas of the enclosure. You could then give them a direct and measured amount of wormer according to their weight. And then we were monitoring how successful the wormer individualized was, which is quite straightforward when you look at it now. But I think back then, you used to basically just get pieces of bread, squirt wormer on, chuck it into the enclosure and hope that all of the individuals would get some. Whereas in a social group such as colobus monkeys, they've got dominant males, and the dominant male would go in and grab all of the bread. So his parasite load would be absolutely non-existent, whereas the other females would be so highly burdened with parasites because they didn't get any wormer. So this way was a really good way of monitoring. So I would have to sit and watch where the colobus monkeys pooped, draw it on a map. And then once the colobus monkeys were removed out of the way for cleaning, I would go in and pick up their poops, label it, and then take it to the labs and go and count how many parasitic eggs were in the poop.
To be fair, though, we're laughing, but to be fair, that sounds quite interesting. I don't know about you, but I imagine sitting there just like, okay, he's on the left side, right? I've got to write that down, write that on the map, and then go there. I imagine that is actually quite interesting.
He certainly beats us just sitting down writing an essay or something.
I know, yeah. It's more interesting than that, isn't it?
I mean, I guess also, what's it like working with, so early on with, you've got all those primates who I'm assuming have different personalities, and they're all not exactly the same, because in that chimp empire thing, I watched only briefly, but all of them are, they're pretty much 90. I think it's 98% same DNA as a human.
Something like
that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, you can really see that some people are like, it's so uncanny. So how's it like to work with different personalities? Do you, I guess, make best friends with one type and then, you kind of avoid the other, or how does it work?
Totally. So I used to work with a lovely herd of giraffe, and there was 5 of them. One of them was called Walder, and he was my favorite. He had one ear slightly over chewed from his mum over grooming him when he was little. So it's kind of those ones that you're like, oh, look at you little weirdo. And so he became my favorite. And there was one called Kubwa who was an absolute nightmare. So back in my days of zookeeping, we would go in with the giraffes and we'd work around them because, generally they're really pretty docile and they just keep themselves to themselves. But there was the Kubwa, the giraffe, was a hand-reared giraffe. So he was always really observant with people. So whenever you would go in with with the giraffe, you'd have to kind of watch him and where he was, because he would just kind of look down at you from obviously his nicely height, and then kind of wander over and then be like oof and like kick a foot out, and you're like, you little like, what are you doing? Let me put your hay net up, or let me put this browse in.
I'm trying to be nice to you here.
Yeah. Exactly. You're trying your hardest to give them some snacks during the day, and he's just going to be a little plonker. But yeah, so he was always a little troublemaker, and again, it's the ones like that you end up remembering, and they're the ones that are quite cheeky and quite funny. So yeah, in my mind, every single animal has its own personality and its own experiences which shape its personality. And I think the hand rearing for him, he was like always used to people, so he always wanted the human attention. And when he wasn't getting it because he was just in his giraffe herd, he was like, oh, here's my opportunity to get some human attention. So he would take it whenever he could.
I don't know about you, but I mean, I know they say you should never work with children or animals, but I'm pretty much getting convinced of the opposite here.
Yeah.
Might have to change my entire course. Yeah. I mean, so going on from there then, I found out about you. I read that article saying that, animals in the zoos like some, not all of them, but like some like having the visitors there, and they're friendly towards like individuals. Where did that even come about? How did that idea spark, and how did you start with that idea?
So I've been doing work on human-animal interactions for sort of 10 years or so now, and I think it was from working as a zookeeper that things really started to, when you notice if keepers were hungover, and not suggesting that this happens very often at all, but if people were hungover and they were working around the animals almost knew, and they were kind of playing up just to really wind them up. And then, on a day when you're completely fine and, you're like, oh, I've got extra time because I've been able to work, do loads of cleaning really quickly, and the rhinos wouldn't shift into different enclosures. They'd be just stubborn and standing there, and you're like, oh. So, you notice when you're a keeper and you're working closely with these animals, the interactions that each individual has with people. So it kind of started off looking at how different animals respond to different keepers, and then we've kind of started to kind of branch out a little bit more and look at, well, okay, how do visitors respond within zoos, and how there's been quite a lot of publications now that looked at huge array of different species and lots of different visitor types. So is it the noise? Is it children? Is it adults? Is it just general visitors? Is it high numbers of visitors, low numbers of visitors? So there has been hundreds of publications now looking at that. So this particular article was trying to use the publications that have already been made and try and work out specifics as to what it is about animals. Are we having a positive impact on their lives, or are we having a negative impact on their lives? And it was quite nice to see that there were quite a few positives coming out of that, and the press really enjoyed that. I think that particular story, that certain I think the big one was elephants, that elephants were having a really positive experience from the members of the public. And there were some negatives. So there were some frogs. I can't remember the species off the top of my head now. How that's annoying. But a species of frog that was experiencing quite negative influences, I suppose, of visitors. And I think it just goes to show that sometimes we really know what we're doing with some species, and others we don't, and we need to really work on those. And it was interesting that it was the majority of species that we, like amphibians and reptiles, that we don't know a lot about in captivity, that were the ones that they were probably seeing more negative responses than the ones that we know more about, so the mammals and birds.
Why is that? Is it because them being in captivity is, I mean, I don't know. Why is it that you don't know more about reptiles? Because obviously they've been around for quite a while.
Even longer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is it just the frequency of the research? Is it that not many people want to have a reptile? I mean, kids would rather much look at a cuddly, little penguin going about, or rather than a tarantula. What's the reason there?
Yeah, so I suppose we looked at the charismatic animals, and the charismatic animals generally are those ones that are fluffy. They've got big eyes. They've got kind of some form of anthropomorphic features, so that we can relate to them a little bit more. And I think certainly with reptiles and amphibians, fish, we struggle as humans to kind of connect to them a little bit more. And don't get me wrong, I know there's certainly a lot of individuals out there who love reptiles and amphibians. I also think it's linked to the way that they're housed. So a lot of research that's come into the zoo industry has, I suppose, migrated from agricultural research. And so that's been cows, it's been sheep, it's been goats, it's been,
First-hand experience with the goats.
Exactly. Goats, got to bring them back in. But yeah, so, chickens, a lot of work has been revolved around that within the farming industry. And that's where a lot of the funding comes from. So big grants, government funded grants, BBSRC, for example, they will fund farm and agricultural welfare research because it's impacting on millions of animals in the country. Whereas trying to find some research funding for your tank of 5 frogs is not really going to have that much of an impact in terms of where the knowledge can be taken. So I think it's about trying to fund sort of smaller scale case study style projects, but also utilize students, for example, have to do their dissertations, and all of those studies would be really useful to kind of provide more detail on the needs of reptiles and amphibians, for example.
So when you were kind of like collating all that information to kind of put it out there, did you kind of go in with like a predisposed kind of hypothesis of what's going to happen? Did you think, they probably won't prefer more people, they would prefer? What was your kind of initial idea?
Yeah, so in lectures for the past couple of years, I've mostly when we've been talking about the impacts of the public on animals in zoos, I've always sort of said, go and find me a paper where there's a positive story. And I don't know whether it's the students that have just not necessarily looked that hard, or the fact that they just didn't exist, and there weren't papers published that showed humans having a positive impact. So it's only really within the past couple of years where we know more about animal behavior in zoos, we know more about what they need, and we design their enclosures so that we can make sure that animals have got choice to be able to move out of the way from the public if they want to, or integrate with the public if they want to. Integrating within reason, of course. They can be close nearby, they can get involved with feeding activities, and that also might be having quite a positive impact. So quite a lot of zoos will offer feeding experiences, and so the public will hold leaves out for giraffe or grapes for lemurs or whatever it might be. Excuse me. And so maybe it's those sorts of experiences which is then providing that positive reinforcement between the public and the animals, so they're becoming less fearful and they're being more confident around the humans.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to seem a pretty obvious question, pretty obvious answer, but do you think that's why it probably was more of like positive results that you've got? Because if they, like say, you're kind of more focusing on work with like the animals that have been raised and born, raised and whatever in captivity, that it's almost like a second nature that there is people, within an eye view of them. Do you think that's why they were more accepting than, I don't know, if you used to go to somewhere completely where they're they're just on their own in the open field, that they'd have a very different reaction? Do you think that's just why they're the more positive outcome?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that the animals in zoos, they're still wild. They're not domesticated, but they are maybe slightly tamer than their wild counterparts. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I wouldn't go wandering into enclosures with tigers and lions and gorillas and chimps, because they can be pretty brutal and you've got no control over what happens. But I think you'd probably be better off in a zoo cage than you would in the wild with tigers and lions and things like that. So yeah, I think being raised around humans, and I think now the generations, we're 20 generations maybe or more of animals being raised in captivity, so they're born, they're used to humans being around, they're used to their parents being around humans, so it's kind of that inbuilt confidence, I suppose.
I mean, I know I read that once that Mike Tyson offered some zookeeper like 50,000 or for $500,000 or whatever it was to go and spend like 5 minutes in a gorilla cage, and he was like, "I'll sort him out." And the zookeeper was like, "Absolutely not.
No, you will not.
Absolutely not. You might be the hardest man on the planet, but you are nothing compared to like a silverback that will kill you."
Yeah, they're brutal. Like, I mean, I suppose they're seen to be more gentle, but like, you just, yeah.
No, absolutely not. Nowhere near. Would not get me. You couldn't pay me any money to get in a cage with one of them.
No. I mean, it always makes me laugh is that, you think about, I mean, obviously, Mike Tyson can probably do pull-ups and strict pull-ups and, some lifts and body weight and things, but the way that they move around their enclosures and climb to the tops and swing around, and you're like, he's shifting like 110 kilos of weight without a problem. So, yeah, he could squash your little teeny brain in 2 seconds.
I guess it's because they're quite lean, right? Is because they don't really have much body fat. It's literally all muscle.
That's what they're doing all day, every day.
Yeah.
They're not like literally look at us sitting here talking. They're not doing that. Are they? There's something in that tree. Let me go and move over there. They're
and
always
they don't have
on
cake or stuff. They don't have, fast food. It's literally just they survive on what they can, which I think is. I think it's incredible.
And and like you said, the diets and things that they're provided with is pristine diet. That's what they would need. So it's all calculated and wonderfully worked out according to their their needs. And like you say, there's no kind of McDonald's or some kind of lovely cake pastry that they're getting at the end for a pudding. So
throw a KFC bargain bucket over for one. I don't think that's going to end well, is it? I mean, we've spoken about kind of like, I guess, you call it maybe like a psychological difference between them in the wild and them kind of in captivity and how they relate and interact with people. I know maybe it's a bit too short of a time to notice, but is there any physical differences between any of the animals you've worked with? Like, not like massive, obviously, differences, but is there anything different between those that are like out there in the wild and in person, or is it still pretty much the same, like exactly the same animal?
Yeah, they're pretty much the same. There has been a study that was looking at bone strength, I think. And I think there was bone strength in carnivores, and a scientist up in Edinburgh was looking at the bone structures, I suppose, of captive tigers versus wild tigers, and bearing in mind that I think he had like one sample of wild tiger bone to use, and 2 or 3 samples of zoo tiger bone, and they were very similar in terms of their density and everything along those lines. So I think realistically, there's not huge differences in terms of the captive versus wild in terms of their physical, I suppose, their biology. There of course might be slight changes with regards to maybe things like dentition, because in the wild they would normally eat lots of bone and lots of different things, and in captivity we've generally, up until more recently, just been providing meat, because we didn't necessarily understand that actually eating the bone was part of their diet and was needed as part of their diet, and so that might have change things a little bit, but generally they're pretty similar in terms of size, in terms of shape, in terms of their kind of structure and things. So
because it just made me think, because I only found this out the other week, that basically we're pretty much losing our jawline muscles, because all these like protein shakes and everything, we just you're drinking it, it's all liquid, it's no kind of, you're not forcing your jaw to really be, I guess, as mobile and as active and chewing. But I was just wondering, does that have then, is there kind of an impact the same way? Whereas if it's like they're just getting meat off the bone, is there a difference, a subtle difference? Because you're not going to see much, but only a little.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why zoos will bring in something called environmental enrichment, and these are different, different techniques that will encourage animals to perform the same sorts of behaviours for the same sorts of time frame. So one again that sort of springs to mind is well, tigers or carnivores catching prey. So a lot of the time they spend in the wild, they're hunting down prey. So it's cognitive. They're kind of chasing down prey. So it's sort of physical enrichment, physical kind of movements. And then there's that muscular component as well, because they've got to hang on to their prey. They've got to pull it down, and then they've got to hold it down until it's dead, and then they can sort of start and eat. So that whole process from just even thinking about catching prey to eating is really long in terms of time, but is really, really complex. And so zoos devise different ways and methods that they can try and mimic that within captivity. Now, obviously, we can't go throwing live cows and things into zoos, although there are a few in a few countries.
That was literally going to be my next question. I was going to say, I think I watched a video the other day, I think it was in India or something, they just like released this goat into this like tiger cage.
Like Jurassic Park.
And it just got mauled. Like it had no chance. That's what I was going to say. Like, and obviously that you can't really do that, you know, in Twycross Zoo or something, with surrounded by a bunch of, you know, people standing there. Oh my God, this goat is being torn apart.
Imagine the children watching it. That'd be.
But like, what is your opinion on that? Should it be done if possible, or nah?
No, I mean, so in this country, we have the Zoo Licensing Act, and within the Zoo Licensing Act, it's basically, it's not necessarily banned, but it's severely discouraged, because you've got to think about the welfare of both parties. So in the wild, your prey item could escape. And I don't know whether you noticed, but majority of the BBC natural history footage, they will try and catch something, and probably 95% of the time that prey item goes, because they don't want to have to show the poor children watching this TV show that, you know, animals die. But, you know, there might be the odd time when it's successful. But obviously in the captivity, your goat, for example, poor goat again, or your cow, can't get away. They can't escape. So it's just the stress and the upset and the welfare of the goat has to also be managed. You can't just, you know, decide that a tiger is more worthy than a goat and then off you go. So for me, we shouldn't be doing that. It's not really fair on the prey items, because they have no means of escape, and they're just, you know, it's just not necessary.
I wonder as well, I mean, I wonder if that would affect, because I've read this in cows. If you kill cows a certain way and they know basically they're going to die, the meat tastes different, or it has different proteins in it or something. I wonder if that would be the same way it's exactly the same thing. If it knows it's going to die, will it affect the proteins and meat aspect? So is it then subsequently like healthier to feed already pre-dead or butchered animals? If it then better quality food for the animal?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I don't think it's ever been measured in terms of animal prey. It certainly would be interesting. But yeah, you know, if you offer a stressed animal meat versus high welfare meat, see which one they prefer. That's a really good research question. I'll see if we can get onto that. But yeah, so I think, I mean, certainly with humans, there's been quite a lot of research into taste and meat quality and things like that. And yeah, stressed meat doesn't taste anywhere near as good. And it's to do with, I think, the pH changing and the hormone levels within the meat that changes the pH and the time taken for it to change. So yeah, anyway.
Which, funnily enough, leads in, I was going to say, once you've done that research project now, when was it you completed that research? When did that come out? The one about the one we were talking about with the relationship between the public and animals. When did that get released?
So that was published about 2 months ago, I think. Maybe May, June time, I think it was. So that was a couple of months ago.
Do you have any more kind of lined up, or is this kind of a bit of breathing room? Is there a few you've got?
Never. As soon as one closes, the next one opens. No, we're just in the process of, we've just finished submitting some proofs for a new paper looking at positive welfare indicators. So we've selected three different behaviours that are indicative of positive welfare in carnivores, to see if there's any way of being able to predict which carnivores can perform positive behaviours in zoos compared to negative ones. So about 15 years ago, there was a paper that was quite influential in the zoo industry, which damned pretty much keeping carnivores in captivity, and mainly because they found that home range size, so if they have a large home range size in the wild, they're going to have a higher chance of pacing and therefore negative abnormal behaviors in captivity. And this is, I mean, it was a very, very well done paper, and it was really, good to kind of start and notice these things. But for a while now, I've kind of been thinking, well, if all you're looking is at negative, then all you're going to see is negative. Well, let's see if we can use those carnivore papers and see if we can predict positive outcomes as well as negative outcomes. And so that's what we've done. And basically what we found is that there are no natural indicators of positive welfare. So it doesn't matter what their home range is, it doesn't matter what their, where they would live naturally in the wild, their latitude or longitude, and lots of other different kind of natural biological characteristics. But actually the most important thing is the way that we keep them, and providing them with enrichment, providing them with their, good sort of, I suppose, good husbandry, will then encourage positive behaviors. So that's going to be out in about 2 weeks, I'd say.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Fresh off the press.
News, yeah.
And I'm guessing then after that, like you say, you've kind of straight into the next one and the next one and the next one, innit? Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Do you get to spend much time going back into zoos now, or is it very much just kind of theory-based and just reading more papers?
I try to. So, I suppose from me coming from an industry background, then industry academia, I kind of like to still be involved in zoos as much as I can. So I sit on the ethics and welfare of the zoo ethics and welfare committee at ZSL, so London and Whipsnade Zoo. So I get to go down there and kind of have a wander around and make sure that what they're doing is all ethical and wonderful. And, I do visit I've got a few little zoo geek friends that we like to go on little zoo trips. So in the beginning of, mid-September, beginning of September, before term starts, we're going down to Devon to visit 4 different zoos on 3 different days.
No
so a little zoo tour.
Like a
little zoo
crawl.
marathon.
Yeah, zoo crawl. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned ZSL because I'm actually going there this Friday.
Oh, very good.
So do you have any tips for me? Anything for me to see first?
Are you whipsnading or Londoning?
Londoning.
Londoning.
It's because my sister's on half term, and I thought, well, we want a break from our little dog because, my sister looks after him every single waking minute of her half term. So I thought, let's take a break from this animal and let's go see.
Let's go to the other ones.
Let's go to the other ones. What would you say is probably the hottest thing there now?
That's a good question.
Good question.
Trying to think. So the penguins are good.
Okay.
The penguin, I think they do a really good penguin talk. But I think my all-time favourite at London Zoo is the spider walkthrough.
Ooh, okay. What's
It's
that?
So they've got the Madagascan orb spiders. So they don't bite. They're not poisonous, of course. And you basically walk through the invertebrate zone, and you kind of walk through this little path, and they basically just make their webs wherever they want, and you can kind of like duck under their webs and walk right next to them. So it's a bit like a lemur walkthrough or a wallaby walkthrough, but it's spiders. So it's just really different really. Yeah.
Would you?
I
do that?
don't know if I'm a fan of that one, to be honest.
I mean, I'll do that. I think I'm looking forward to that. I don't mind spiders.
Like snakes and things, I'm all right kind of thing. I don't know what it is. Them 8 legs and them eyes staring at me. I'm not a fan of that one.
Actually, that's a good point. Are there any animals that you're scared of, or you just simply won't work with? Because if I was ever to work with animals or anything, I would never work with like alligators or anything that can like sharks or something like I
don't think there's sharks kept in many zoos.
I know, but I'm just saying, it's just are there any animals you just wouldn't work with because you're not scared or had bad experiences with? Not like if they're cheeky or something, but
Not really. I have to admit, I'm more nervous about horses than any other animal.
Really?
And I think that's just because they're just so I think if you're walking in a field with them and there's like 6. There's lots of we live near Southwell Racecourse, so there's lots of breeding racehorses around by in fields, and you're supposed to just walk through them with your dogs, and they're all youngsters, and they all come running over to you like, oh, hello, and you're like, oh, go away. I've got 2 dogs and a me, and I've got to try and manage this whole situation. So yeah, but no, working with, I generally, I'm happy to try and work with anything. I've never really been a species specialist. I've always just been a topic specialist, and I quite like that because it does mean that I can dabble with whatever is thrown at me, rather than just being the go-to for elephants or the go-to for whatever dolphins. But yeah.
How is it? I mean, we speak to a few people, and some find it difficult to kind of turn off from their work, kind of thing. But I guess when you've been working with, say, like chimps all day or whatever, and you can see these like weird human similarities, can you like switch it off, or do you come back and go, oh, you're just behaving like, you know, Jimmy the giraffe or something, if you've just done the same thing 3 hours ago? Like, how difficult is that to kind of switch off? Especially, like, say, if you're kind of working with animals and you've got animals at home, is it just like an all-round, you're always surrounded
life
by
of
them?
animals? Yeah, I mean, I think when I was a keeper, and when I was working with them, you know, much more closely than what I do now, I don't think you do ever switch off, because you are their communication tool, I suppose, for health and you know, needs and wants and desires. So if you're working with animals and you're like, oh, hang on a minute, something wrong with that one, he's just sat in the corner, and you pick up on the tiniest of cues, because you know what's right, and you therefore go, something's not right, and that will just continue to go round and round and round your head until you've sorted it. But I think from an academic stance, because I'm not as close to those animals anymore, although I do, you know, kind of start to think about certain things and research questions, it's not that intent, or certainly not to a level where, you know, you've got to care for them and look after them in that sense. But yeah, that comes at home with the sheep.
Yeah, I think you'd rather walk through a field of goats than a field of horses, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah. That would be a dream.
But yeah, I guess that kind of goes back to what you were saying before, where you're watching the animals, but they're also watching you just as much, aren't they? You've got the ones that come and have a look round and kick you about a bit, and you're like, what you do? But they're paying attention to you probably even more than you are to them, aren't you? Really?
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really that people don't necessarily think about is that their senses are very different to ours. So although we use, you know, mostly our eyes, there might be certain animals that are just using their ears. And so, you know, although you might be miles away and therefore you can't be seen, a scream or a squeak or whatever, they might be picking up on completely different things than what we would pick up on, because of their way that they would interact with their own environment. So I always think that's pretty amazing to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask was, I think a few years ago, I don't remember when exactly it was. I went to this place. I think it's near Stoke-on-Trent. I think I'm a city boy. I really don't know anywhere up north. I think that's really arrogant to say. But it was this place called Monkey World.
Yeah. I know.
And Phantom Gardens.
Yeah, it was where the I think it was a macaque. I think that's the sort of
correct. Yeah,
the type of monkey that it was. They were just roaming about. And I think it was the first of a time. I mean, we've never had a dog. But at that point, we didn't get our dog, and we were like, oh God, because one just came sort of strolling toward us, and we were like. I was stressing because I was like, do we back away? Do we go towards it? Like, are they used to us? And he just walked past, and like nothing.
Yeah.
So is it? Have animals always been like that, or is it been only sort of the last few decades where they've obviously the research in your field has developed so much? Has it been recent, or has it been a more long-standing thing?
I don't think anyone's really put a lot of time into thinking, you know, to planning or researching the length of time it's taken or how the change has happened. I think it's just been documented that there is a change, if you know what I mean. Certainly the monkeys at Trentham Garden are they're a breed that are normally not quite so friendly.
Yeah.
But they've all been captive bred from a zoo over in Holland, if I'm correct.
Oh, okay.
And so they're used to that kind of setting, and so they decided that they'd set one up in this country, and it's been wonderfully successful, and just really different. But yeah, I mean, any other type of macaque, I'd be like, what? Yeah, walk through macaque exhibit? Are you kidding? Because they can be brutal. I mean, you go to Gibraltar and they're in your bags and they're ripping things, and
they're like seagulls with legs, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of it is the way their experiences, their past experiences, and the way that that they live. If they're competing for food, then they're going to try and steal food off you, or they're going to grab something. And if they're successful, then they'll keep doing it and keep doing it. So they're kind of their abilities to learn is massive. And I suppose you've just got to manage their learning opportunities so that they don't all of a sudden start learning that there's loads of food in the bottom of prams and you can pull them all out, and and as long as you're managing that correctly, then you won't get macaques on prams and so on and so forth.
Hopefully not.
I mean, I guess what my kind of last question, just to wrap it up in a way, if, I don't know, maybe you won the lottery tomorrow, right, for whatever reason, or the government give you some money and they say you can go anywhere and you want, anywhere in the world you want, and you can spend, I don't know, a month looking at whatever animal, and you can literally basically, like, as close as you can get to basically live with them for a month. What would be your, like, go-to saying, oh, I've got to go there? Like,
apart from goats.
Yeah, apart from a field of goats. Would it be somewhere, I don't know, would it be somewhere like where they're doing the chimp empire in Go-Go? Would you want to do something like that, or would you go more like
Arctic,
or what would you be your go-to?
I think I would love, so I've been lucky enough to go to Africa, and so I feel like I've ticked off quite a lot of good African herbivore stock, but I've not really spent a lot of time over in kind of Southeast Asia. So I think it would definitely be somewhere maybe Southeast Asia way. And I think, interestingly, I'm not really into primates, but I think it would probably be primate focused because there's just so many weird and wonderful primates over that way that it would be something like that. But I have done, I suppose, a bit of field research, and I just didn't really enjoy it as much as what I enjoy zoos. So I think if I was going to be offered loads of money to go and research in wherever it wanted to be, it would probably be Singapore Zoo, because I've never been there and it looks amazing. And I would do some form of research there.
Well, no, I've said last one, but why not another one? So if you were to do something like that, would you kind of stick to one, or because I know you said earlier that you kind of not like stick to one animal or one species, you kind of branch out and focus on a lot. Would you then, if you could do that, focus on a lot more whilst you was there, like, or do you feel like this one
definitely.
is the one?
Yeah, I'd like to keep it broad. I mean, generally I would choose a sort of taxonomic group, so it might be herbivore species. Something that I'm really interested in is whether herbivores are having more of a positive impact when they don't, when they're choosing to interact with the public. Because if you think about carnivores, they have to get their food from people. There's not just, I mean, unless there's mice and rats running around, which then means the zoo's pest control is not going so well. But yeah, so I think for me, how and why herbivores interact with people would be really cool. And I'd like to then do that with lots of different herbivores. So yeah.
So yeah, if anybody wants to find out more and to research more of the ones you've done, obviously you've got that article and information that was out 2 months ago. If they want to find out more, where's best to go?
Probably rather boringly, I don't have my own website or anything like that, but I've got on my wonderful work email or work web address. So if you just Google Samantha Ward and NTU, so Nottingham Trent University, you've got my website on there, and then links to all of my publications are up in the top screen, I think, somewhere. So.
And then when's the next one coming out?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
So
roughly?
2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm also on Twitter. Oh, or is it X? I still can't get into using X. Yeah.
No, Elon definitely wants X, doesn't he? He's forcing that in every. What was it? PayPal was X first or something, and SpaceX. But
anyway.
We'll see what happens with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well,
So
thank you very much for your time today. I think I've learnt quite a lot. I think, and I'll definitely be reading more into this area.
They say you shouldn't work with children or animals, but I think that's
changed my mind.
Yeah, that's
Definitely
argument
work
is
with
there.
animals. Yeah.
But yeah, so like I say, thank you, and maybe come back for part 2 when you come out with some more research.
Yeah, sounds good. Would love to.